the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet.
Happy Easter, happy Passover, and happy Game of Thrones, Lance. You are listening to another Sunday edition of the Finding Nimmo podcast. I am your host, your leader, your friend, Justin Birnbaum. Joined once again by the owner of a brand new 40-inch Panasonic TV, Lance Brzezowski. How you feeling today, Lance?
I'm pretty good. I love the TV. Thank you for finding it in the trash.
You excited for some Easter baseball?
I am, of course.
We've got a good show today. This is going to be the last one for about 7 or 8 days just because of bad scheduling, so we're hoping you enjoy this one, but let's get to it.
'Cause we got ourselves a ball.
Let me talk to you, Lance. Nice and soft. I want to talk about some starting pitching because in the last week or so, what is arguably the Mets' biggest strength, and I'm using the term arguably very lightly because it's definitely the Mets' biggest strength, has kind of devolved into the biggest question mark on this team. As their biggest strength, the success and failure of the Mets starting pitching is going to completely determine their season. And it all starts top down with Jacob deGrom, who has struggled in his last few starts, which is fine because he put together an unbelievable stretch. I mean, he tied the record for most consecutive quality starts, and he's coming off a year where he had a sub-2 ERA and won the Cy Young. So naturally, you have to expect some regression. You can't be that good forever. And so his struggles are welcome, but then he starts to complain of elbow pain. And the term I believe that they used was his elbow was barking.
It's a dog.
Yeah, bark, bark. Shout out to the dog pirates. So after all that, they say he's going to go back to New York, get looked at, get an MRI, and the day after, he has a catch.
Yeah, in St. Louis at Busch Stadium, he's throwing, and this kind of blew up Twitter. It's just kind of one of those things, like it's very Metsy, just based on the last 2 years of just like something happens and then they don't handle the medicals correctly. But at the same time, as a fan, or if you're a fan, you have to defer to the organization in a situation like this. Even if you're skeptical what the organization actually knows and does or whatever, and their proficiency with dealing with injuries like this, like if they don't think he needs an MRI, he doesn't need an MRI. Like you can't, like you're gonna send him to New York and get the MRI and then have it be clean. Like I get the logic behind it, but I guess that maybe it was just like a media overreaction initially, where they were like, we're going to send him back. I bet if it was in New York, if they were in New York hosting a series, they wouldn't even told people he went to get an MRI. You know what I mean?
Well, that would have broken eventually, but what's the downside to not getting an MRI? At this point, if he's having elbow pain, you get a clean bill of health. Isn't that peace of mind? I mean, I know I would want an MRI at that point.
Yeah, I guess they cost, but I mean, I don't see how that would be a detriment, you know, or push them away from it if it's, I can't imagine MRIs are more than a.
So do you have any reason to suspect there's anything going wrong with deGrom? You know things about how he's had a long stretch of continually being out there time and time again. He's always throwing 100 pitches. He's always putting up 6-7 innings. He's developed that kind of workhorse reputation, and to perform at that elite level, the kind of stress that puts on an arm. Does this stand out to you? Were you expecting this to happen in any way? He's already had Tommy John surgery.
No, I mean, he started so strong to the season. Everyone thought it was just a pure carryover, and then there was the blips, obviously. So I guess it's one of those things where you see a couple bad starts, and you're like, I wonder if something isn't right. But at the same time, it could just be like a really small thing. Like it could just be sore. It could just be a simple side effect of him ramping back up activity and throwing hard. Like there's a lot of little things that I think could accumulate into like, oh no, he's probably not 100% right now, but it's also not a reason to shut him down for 2 months. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I don't know. I think this is just one of those growing pain things you work out of. But
well, an interesting about deGrom and the way he trains is, and I'm not sure if he did it this offseason, but I believe last year coming into his Cy Young season, he does not throw any day. Every day of the offseason, he plays catch.
That's actually, I think, a thing that's been bumping in popularity. I know Trevor Bauer throws pretty much every single day. There's a lot of guys who are not taking the extended period of time off. I know there's some that do, but I guess it's more of a personal philosophy thing.
You have any idea why they tend to do this?
No, I mean, my guesses would be guys who have a lot of confidence in their mechanics and their health, like a Bauer who threw like 120 pitches for the third consecutive game. Like he's very confident his mechanics are clean. It's like guys who have a little more of moving parts and stuff, or maybe don't throw as well, might step back and go, I want that time off just to reset, you know, and not throw a baseball and then pick it back up and hopefully correct some of my mistakes that I've been having. But otherwise, I mean, I'd love to hear a pitcher perspective on it. I'm not 100% sure. No.
We'll have to wait for the Cubs to come, the Mets to come into the Cubs
Chicago.
for you to talk to them. Before we move on to Syndergaard, I just want to say it smells delicious in this apartment.
Yeah, I don't know why. I didn't like cook anything. It must be something like down the hall or from outside.
And I have not eaten today. So, Syndergaard.
Mm-hmm.
So, Syndergaard, his stuff looks good. I mean,
Sure, yeah.
that's the thing. You know, it's hard to be concerned about a guy who's struggling when he's throwing the ball hard. His slider looks good. Off speed looks good. I think the issue with Syndergaard is he's just making like little mistakes during the game, leaving one pitch up, getting taken. Because he gives up, and I don't want to say a lot relative to the league, but for a guy like him who's a dominant power pitcher, he gives up a lot of home runs. And I feel like that's indicative of just not hitting your spots at certain points. You know, you could throw 95 perfect pitches, and then if five of those other pitches are right in a batter's wheelhouse, you know, you're translating directly to runs. So I also think that besides that, he's not a guy that's been able to work deep into games, and I think that's starting to hurt him. I mean, you could explain this better than me, but I don't understand why he's not pitching more to contact and trying to generate more ground balls and put balls in play. But kind of take me through what's going on with Syndergaard here.
Well, I mean, a lot of guys who have high velocity like him don't like to work down in the zone because it doesn't play up. So if you're Syndergaard, you're throwing pitches elevated. That's how you get outs. This is like the new trend of high spin fastballs up in the zone. I don't think his fastball super high spin, but it's high velocity. So like it's really hard to generate a lot of contact and pitch to contact if you're working up in the zone. You're going breaking balls up in and then sliders away. It's like the standard MO of what pitchers are doing nowadays. And for the most part, that's what he's doing with his slider and stuff. So like I get the idea of him not wanting to pitch to contact, but there's data that, I mean, just general data that backs up your point about, you know, he's pitching really well. Like based on a lot of the peripheral metrics, he's striking out more guys than he has in the last couple of years, and he's walking a lot less. And sure, the home runs are up a little bit, but for the most part, you know, he's been pretty good. It's just, yeah, there's these couple, like his ERA is 2.5 runs over his FIP right now. He's 5.63 FIP and 5.63 ERA and 3.05 FIP. So based on that alone, it's going to come down because FIP is a component of strikeouts, walks, and home runs, purely the three things that people suggest pitchers can control more than anything. So for the most part, that's good. That's really good. I have to imagine that in the next couple starts, he's going to have one of those 7-inning, 15, ish K games where he just kind of dominates and everything locks in. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't mind him not pitching to contact. I know that's going to create situations where he's at higher pitch counts through 5 or 6 because he's getting so many strikeouts. He's working deep into counts, but that's his MO. Like, I don't know if I would veer out of that. The interesting thing with him is that he's throwing a lot of fastballs. I don't know if you guys are picking up on this, but he's up to like 60%, which is well over league average now. You see a ton of guys now who are like below 50%, around 40%, and throwing a ton of breaking balls, and he's actually cut. So he's going away from his curveball towards his fastball. I don't know if that's just an early season thing for him or whatever. But you know, he's throwing his four-seamer a lot more, and his sinker's down a little bit too, specifically within that fastball component. So maybe he's just relying on his fastball. I don't really know specifically why. Maybe he just feels good with it, but the results haven't been good. So it's one of those things where I'm not 100% sure, but I would not be concerned about him too much.
Well, it's just funny, you know. We've touched on it briefly, but he's so good for portions of starts.
Yeah, it's so tough to hit. It's 90. What is he? 90-mile-per-hour slider, like 91 change. That's got a ton of arm side fade to it. It's gets a good pitch.
Undone by these slight mistakes, and if you're the Mets, you just by sheer way of realizing that the bullpen is not nearly as deep as expected, and Edwin Diaz is not going to not pitch in the 9th inning. You want to see a guy like Syndergaard and DeGrom take 7 innings every time they're on the mound, but every time Syndergaard steps on the mound, I feel like it becomes like a race. Is he going to make it to 5? Is he going to make it to 6?
It's true. It's true.
You know, against a team like St. Louis today, I expect more of the same. I expect like 95 great pitches and 5 mistakes. And with guys in that lineup like Goldschmidt, Carpenter, Ozuna, guys who leave the yard regularly, you know, it's tough to escape something like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much he's faced the Mets, or excuse me, the Cardinals, Syndergaard specifically. So I don't know. I know that batter versus pitcher stuff doesn't stabilize until you get like a crazy huge sample, so it's not really that big of a deal. But this could be a turnaround start for him. I think that he's a nice, like, not producing well right now, but I have a feeling that he's going to start to step up a little bit because there seems to be some conscious mixed differentials. Fastball velocity is actually up a little bit too. That might be a component of throwing more four-seamers, but there's a couple things here that are interesting with him. It's just the results haven't been good, so I'm not concerned with him as much as I would be as a guy like Matz or Wheeler, as we could probably get into right now, or etc. So
yeah, I'm glad you brought up Wheeler because as we're going through, we're gonna explore this one by one. And with Zach Wheeler, top prospect potential, you know, obviously came up and looked really good, and had the Tommy John surgery. It was actually at the game in spring training where he suffered the torn
didn't know
UCL. Since he came back from surgery, it's been an up and downhill climb. Obviously, last year he has this miraculous second half where he's probably the first or second best pitcher in baseball in the second half.
He was insane.
The numbers are really crazy, and a lot of it's overlooked just by his season-long stats. So, a little iffy in his first 3 starts this year. There's good, there's bad, but last start was really what stood out to me because he gave up 2 home runs. The Mets lost 3-2 and got the loss. But he was kind of really good in that start. It's kind of like Syndergaard syndrome where the sum of your parts is great, but you make these few mistakes that ultimately derail you. I mean, the rub with Wheeler is always gives up a lot of hits, gives up a lot of walks, mechanical issues, but ultimately he's someone who can throw hard, good breaking ball, can strike out batters, and generate ground balls. And it's tough because you don't want to wait for the second half for a guy like this to put it together. When the top 2 guys are suffering, more pressure is going to fall onto him.
Yeah, so like that second half thing's always fun because for the most part, what a lot of the statistics say is that, second half is good, but you really have to see like a conscious change for there to be reason to project that pure second half forward into a full season. But most of the time, instead of just looking at the second half, looking at the entire season is more predictive of the year to come. So while a lot of people were like, he's going to be a 2.5 ERA guy, a lot of other people were like, well, you still have to factor in the fact that he wasn't good in the first half, and it's probably some combination of the two. And that's what we're seeing right now. The most confusing thing is just that his slider has not been good, and that's primarily one of his key pitches, his key secondary pitch. I mean, it's like 20% of the time. I'm sure he throws it to either handedness. It works pretty well. It's just gotten hit around. I don't know if the movement's different or anything's wrong with it.
Is he throwing slider exclusively or slider curveball?
Oh, he throws slider curveball, but his curveball's a much lower percentile. It's like half as much.
Well, one thing I remember about Wheeler is I think he was pretty curveball heavy when he first came up. You're going to have to check me on that.
Yeah, he was even slider curve. Now he's more slider over curve. So
that's like a natural progression, though, for guys.
Well, nowadays, everyone's going towards the slider just for various reasons, especially if you're a little bit low over 3/4 arm slot or something.
Yeah.
The problem is a lot of people don't like the fact that you have to wrap your hand so much on a curve.
Well,
so
I figured he's someone with mechanical issues that, it's just easier to play with the slider than play with the curve. But it seems like unless you have a really plus curve, then you kind of
and a lot of those guys are like straight over the top, like James Paxton or Trevor Bauer or something.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, he's interesting. It's odd because the results haven't been good. The most confusing thing probably is the command side of things. He's walking a ton of guys right now, which we're going back to Syndergaard and we're encouraging Syndergaard because he's not walking guys. He's striking out a lot of guys. He's home runs or whatever. That's probably a little bit factor of just the pure inflation of what we're seeing now. It seems like everyone's giving up a lot of home runs. It seems like every Mets pitcher is giving up a lot of home runs, and I don't know if it's going to sustain, so I just don't know how much stock I want to put in that specifically. But I agree on the mistake side of things. But if we're encouraging the fact that Syndergaard's good because he's striking out guys, he's not walking guys, Wheeler's not really in either of those buckets. He's walking a lot of guys, and his strikeouts are down slightly. So as a whole, I don't know if I'm as encouraged by Wheeler, but at the same time, I do think that what he did in the second half of last year was important. There's a key in there as to what he was able to lock in and how well he was able to pitch. So I'm not as confident in I'm not as confident in Wheeler as I am in Thor right now in terms of bouncing back quickly. I think Wheeler probably has to do a little bit more of a movement and kind of figuring out why he's not pitching well, why his slider's not working well in terms of results purely. So I'm a little more concerned there, but I don't think I'm overly concerned about him. I just think the command is kind of odd and the slider is a little weird. Those are kind of the two main things that I think a lot of people would probably kick to in terms of saying, why these 4 starts have, as a whole, not been great. So
okay, moving on, I want to jump to Mr. Infinite ERA.
Yeah.
Mr. Steven Matz, who Wally Backman once called the best prospect in the system while Syndergaard was still in the system.
Yeah,
and
he was touted for a very long time, Matz.
I actually was at Matz's debut, and the more impressive side of that was him at the plate, ironically. But we've watched Steven Matz for quite some time now, and it's very evident that he has some pretty strong stuff, but he was always going to be followed by that inconsistency and injury bug. And the injury bug has been more the factor throughout his career. He's never really had great stretches where he's been able to find a groove and stick with it for 20 starts in a row. Mm-hmm. And for some guys, that's just it. Your body just doesn't cooperate. I mean, when Steven Matz was drafted, he immediately needed Tommy John surgery and didn't pro debut for a few years. But you get to a point in a career, and Steven Matz he's going to be 28 years old. Mm-hmm. So at this point, it's kind of like put up or shut up. I mean, the pressure isn't tremendously on him because he's kind of been relegated to a fourth starter. And that's not a bad thing because you got three really strong pitchers at their best in front of you. But you look at what you get from him this year, and he comes out in his first three starts and is pretty much exactly what we all want to see. Attacking the zone, not getting hit too bad, not giving up a ton of runs. I think his strikeouts could probably stand to improve a little bit, but in his second and third starts, he did strike out 8 each. Not really walking batters either, and that was a really good sign.
Yeah.
And then Philadelphia happens.
It's a weird one.
It's going to be an aberration. It's not going to be something that you could expect to happen every time. No. But I am worried that a lot of the things that went wrong for him in that game could come back to bite later on. I think that Steven Matz is, and I actually see a lot of fans pointing this out on the internet, that he's the kind of player that falls into quicksand where he gives up a few runs or gets into a jam and he's unable to work out of it mentally. I mean, I don't like to put guys in that bucket, but, we're starting to get some pretty strong evidence here. More so than Syndergaard and Wheeler, missing a few pitches a game. There's a little bit of a luck factor with Matz. It feels like Matz doesn't always hit his spots, and this is kind of an anecdotal thing. There's probably a way you can quantify this, but when Matz is getting hit hard, it's like kind of deserved at this point because he's throwing a lot of pitches over the plate, a lot of pitches that a team like the Phillies can attack, and the Phillies do have a top tier offense.
Really good offense, yeah.
So I don't know what to do for Matz at this point. I don't know if he's a pitcher that's going to thrive in New York, especially with, the alleged mental side of the game bothering him. And I just don't know if he's a guy that really still has this destiny to be a top-tier pitcher. I mean, what do the peripherals say?
Peripherals are okay. I mean, it's skewed so much by this last start, though, because he's given up 2 home runs. He didn't record an out. So that's going to plummet everything down for him. Yeah. But he's weird because I actually look back. He had another start, I think, in September of last season where he went 2/3 of an inning and gave up 7 earned runs.
Yeah.
So he has like these weird outings where he just like absolutely implodes, And I don't really know like what to make of that. But I think for the most part, it's just kind of odd. Like I agree with you because one of the things I always think about in terms of like the value of an ace that really isn't quantified. It's quantified because it eventually goes back into the total statistics, of the player. But a guy like Kluber, okay? Kluber has outings where he'll go like 5 or 6 innings and he'll give up like 8 or 9 earned runs or in that window of like this crazy amount of earned runs. But the key there is that he's giving up those runs early and then he's pushing through the start and he's not putting it all in the bullpen. Whereas a guy like Matz, it seems like Callaway and prior managers and stuff just have more of a quick hook with him where they just don't want him to keep imploding, which I guess is understandable for a guy who's not a top 2 in a rotation. They're not just going to let a guy stick it out. But Matz gets pulled really early in these starts. And it's like I almost wonder in that outing against Philadelphia where he's giving up a ton of runs and home runs, etc., if they just let him, like, if one of those balls turns into a ground rule or a double play, if one of those choppers or whatever, and he flips it and then he gets out of the inning, like, is he a guy that you're able to then push through 5 innings? Can he settle in for those next 4? That is really, really important, I think, to take 1, pressure off the bullpen, and 2, give yourself confidence that these problems that he's allowing are just blips. Like, he's 2 home runs, an error. He only had 4 hits in that inning. Like, 4 hits, 8 runs, and a walk. It's a really, really weird outing of baseball, and it's more blippy to me than anything. Like, those first 3 starts were good. They were super encouraging. His changeup looked good. Righty heavy lineups, lefty working at it looked fine to me. And then this outing is just going to weigh on his resume for a really long time. But there's going to be the point where you hit like 10 or 15 starts in where you look back at Matz, I think, and you take out this one outing in Philadelphia, and it looks like a completely different pitcher just because the amount of garbage that he gave up in this one outing where he didn't record an out, it's just going to weigh him down so much as the total season as a whole. So,
well, it's like you said, Matz has been the pitcher where he's thrown gems. Like,
yeah,
he's had some really good games at the major league level. And I like to go back to his last 2 starts of this spring because they're a microcosm of who he is as a pitcher. March 21st, he threw 5 innings and didn't surrender any runs. And March 15th, he threw 2 innings and gave up 8 earned runs.
Yeah,
so
weird.
I mean, it's cliche, but he's Jekyll and Hyde.
He is. He's the most Jekyll and Hyde pitcher in this rotation.
The funny thing is, though, as much as flawed as he is, like, I still just can't get over. Like, I'm not ready to abandon him the way I have pushed Jason Vargas out the window.
Oh yeah, no.
Like,
no. Very different.
I don't know what value Jason Vargas being on the big league roster has anymore at this point. And I understand that you're paying him, so I mean, there's incentive to try and get your value's worth and give him a shot. But and I got to walk this back because when they signed him, I was like, "This is great." You know, Sandy is really making a move towards win. This is depth. Jason Vargas is just no longer a major league pitcher. I mean, he had that really nice stretch in Kansas City that kind of got him this contract.
Yeah, but this goes back to what we were just talking about with, like, you look at the whole picture of that season. The whole season for him was not really that good. He had a really good stretch with Kansas City in the second half of that year. Yeah. He was garbage. So,
I mean, this was a bargain-chasing move by the Mets. And the early returns from this year have already proven that while you can get a good start out of him here or there, if you're starting Jason Vargas in 32 games over the course of a season, you're losing win value there. Like, you could buy back some of that value if you were invested elsewhere. And I know that he did have a semi-productive start where he threw 4 innings and gave up only 1 run. But if you look at a lot of other pitchers, especially around the league, and they had a 4-inning start with 1 run, I don't know how good you would consider that. I mean, have our expectations just plummeted so far that we'll just take anything at this point? And once again, when I say we, I refer to myself as a person who follows baseball and this team, not as a member of the organization. But the 1/3 of an inning start from April 13th that prompted me to write an entire column on how the Mets aren't committed to winning is just really what's standing out in my head, and I'm pretty sure we're going to see more of that.
It's just the who Vargas is just not what present day baseball benefits. He's a sinker ball pitcher who can't get ground balls, who's relinquishing a lot of fly balls, and he can't strike guys out, and he has no command. And it's just like, I don't know which of those 5 things you want to fix first to make him a viable starting pitcher, but I just don't see any way that he is productive. And even in the games he's productive, he's going to allow a lot of contact. In that 5-inning start to start the year in Miami, 8 hits over 5 innings, 1 walk, 2 strikeouts. That's not good. That's not a good outing. I understand he gets through 5 innings. That whip is really high. It's unsustainable. He's not striking out enough guys. He's giving up 2 earned runs. It's like, even a start that is okay for him is really not that good. It's like he's really bad. There's no way to fix it either. I don't see any way to fix it.
This, beyond what you say with the peripherals, there's 2 things that stand out to me. For one, the velocity.
Yeah.
It's like you said, if you're a sinker ball pitcher who is not getting ground balls,
yes, that's
and the ball's getting up, then not being able to touch 90 miles per hour is really bad.
Yeah, especially when you look at guys like Greinke and Hendricks and stuff. Like, they're able to manipulate. They have really good off-speed command. That's like the biggest thing that pushes them through. Like, Greinke's now throwing like 40% fastball, I think, and he's purely like this 65 mile per hour curve with like he knows how to pitch. Like, Vargas just doesn't know how to pitch. Really, he's throwing 85 miles per hour right now. It's insane. I don't understand why he's in this rotation. I'd rather just give a kid like Flexen a shot. Like, I know Flexen was terrible the other day. Well, let him throw.
We're about to get into that, but the last thing I want to point out about Vargas is the whip.
Yeah. It's just,
if you're going to give up more than 2 hits or walks per inning, I don't have the numbers here, but I'd love to know what % you have of giving up a run when you allow 2 base runners in an inning.
It's got to be high.
It's got to be tremendous.
Runs have to be like almost 1.
Yeah. So if he's giving at least 2, if surrendering 2 base runners every inning, the Mets have to worry about giving up a run literally every inning. And I mean, obviously, it hasn't happened every time, but
again, you look at the aggregate outcome, it's going to happen more often than not, and that's where he's
if you win 3 out of every 5 games, you're a playoff team. But if your top 3 starters aren't winning, and you have Steven Matz and Jason Vargas in the back end of your rotation pitching like this, then I don't know what to tell you. I truly don't. But last thought on this quickly, Chris Flexen. I've seen him come up and pitch now a little while. He started yesterday. I'm very surprised to see he's touching 96.
Yeah, I think that's a velocity bump from what I was looking at too.
But he's not major league depth. I mean, I don't know what they're doing with that, and I don't know if they're comfortable bringing Gisselman and Lugo back from the bullpen. I don't know if they want to keep them in there as long relievers, innings eaters. I mean, ultimately with those 2 guys in the bullpen is better. But right now, this team is sorely lacking starting pitching depth, and it just begs the question: why not bring someone in? I mean, there are rumors that they've been interested in Mike Minor, but there are people on the free agency market, mainly Dallas Keuchel, who's the more pricier option, and Gio Gonzalez, the cheaper one. Gio Gonzalez will be on the market because the Yankees will not be adding him.
Yep.
Why not sign one of these guys? Like, what's the harm here?
Yeah, so I mean, Minor's got another control at $9.5 million. It's like a war, and he's been interestingly decent. I guess he's something. I don't know. I guess I'm just not that in on 31-year-old pitchers who don't really strike out anybody. But he's been really good this year. He's not giving up a lot of home runs, which he's done consistently throughout his career. I think the move is Keuchel. I guess like I agree with you in this respect. Like of all the options that are out there, like I'd rather just pick up Keuchel and slot him in there. I mean, especially if they're looking at the rotation now and maybe there's a little bit of worry around any of these 4 pitchers. Like my initial anti-Keuchel approach was that you just don't need a 5th starter with these 4. But like, I guess if you want to hedge against the 4 and maybe something happens to one of them, which seems relatively likely, it's just as with any pitcher, 1 in 4 pitchers probably get some kind of injury that sets them down for a month or 2. So yeah, I mean, I get it if you want to slot him in and then bring him up and make him your 4 in the rotation as opposed to making him your 5 if DeGrom's fine. So I think the move is Keuchel, excuse me, as opposed to a guy like Minor, but. Just my opinion. I think that Keuchel's a little bit better of a track record. He's a pure ground ball pitcher. I think a lot of what Minor's doing in Texas is a little more just luck based right now.
Well, what's funny is the kickback I got for, I wrote a column saying the Mets aren't committed to winning because they're not doing what they can to put the best starting rotation out there, which was not received well by fans. And I cited Dallas Keuchel being available as one of those options. And, I remember, and we're going to have a dramatic reading of one of my favorite comments later. Somebody said to me, you shouldn't just go out there and sign the best player available. Well, in this case, the best player available at this position can directly impact the Mets in a good way. And yes, he's not the Cy Young winner he was a few years ago, but you're talking about a heavy ground ball pitcher, a workhorse. What's bad about this? And the price, $17 million, yeah, it's a lot of money. Baseball players get paid a lot, but relative to the value of a win, it's surplus value almost.
Especially if it's a 1 year thing. Yeah. I mean, I just think it's smart to just give him the year. If you're the Mets, I don't understand why you haven't offered like 1 in 14 and see what he says. Because at this point, the price for both these guys has to be dropping a lot as you start taking innings off the table. Like his projection right now, if he starts, I think is only like 150. So it's like at that point, you're barely even going to qualify for the starting pitcher threshold. It's usually like 130. So I don't know. We'll see. There's been some injury concerns. I was reading something that, he had the neck problem last year, and they don't think that's something that's like a acute injury. I think it's a little more chronic. So, but at the same time, that wasn't really confirmed by anyone, so I don't really know. I guess medicals are medicals in regards to free agency, but he's the move. I mean, you kick Vargas out, you DFA him. I don't really know. It's this weird 5th starter thing. This is honestly one of those teams we're going back to the fact that I just think that teams should start bullpenning more. Like the Mets are primed for it, but I do get that you lose Selman and Lugo in the bullpen, which you kind of need right now because Familia hasn't been that good. Or neither Justin Wilson too. So you need those guys deep in the game. So you can't really just pull the Rays method and bring them out every 5th day for a couple innings. So,
all right. Well, that was a doozy. We're going to take a break and come back to a short little Jeff McNeil segment.
This is deep to right. Harper goes back, and it's off the top, and it's over the fence. A home run. Just cleared that railing in right field. Wilson Ramos starts the Mets comeback. His first home run as a New York Met. It's an opposite field shot. And now it's 10-1 Philadelphia.
Boy, this park is so tiny.
Lance, yesterday Jeff McNeil picked up his 100th career hit in his 291st at bat. That made Jeff McNeil the fastest Mets player ever to 100 hits. And if I remember correctly, Gary Cohen said Moises Alou previously held that record.
Good name drop.
We'll have to fact check that later. But I look at Jeff McNeil and I see a guy who just has not stopped hitting since he's come up to the major leagues. And he can play all around the field, and he's pretty much become an invaluable tool to this Mets roster. And I'm very thankful he did not get flipped in to that trade.
Yeah, for Diaz.
Right,
yeah.
However, Jeff McNeil is 26 years old. I believe he's turning
27 already.
He's 27 already. I didn't know if he was going to turn 27 or if he was already.
April birthday, so he just turned.
Okay, so Jeff McNeil is 27 years old. That means he's kind of veering to the end of what we now know as the baseball prime.
Yeah, it's like 27 to 28. So,
and granted, contact hitters
age well.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, what kind of ceiling does a guy like McNeil have, who's an overlooked prospect, who's coming up at an advanced age? I know that we basically had the same conversation about Jacob deGrom not too long ago,
true,
and he won a Cy Young, but we can't expect that to happen every time. So I kind of just want to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, his ceiling is pretty good. Like, the thing is, we don't have much of a precedent of him over like 162 games or the projected 130, 40 he'll probably play this year. So you don't know. Like, it's a lot of like kind of combining numbers. You could double up what he did last year in 63 games, and at that point he's a 5-WAR guy, which I guess you could say that's his ceiling, but I'll say it's more probably around like 3.5, which is really, really good for someone who was not really considered too much of a prospect. But I almost wonder, this trend of guys who are really, really good contact hitters, who are these like sub 10% walk and strikeout guys that are just putting the ball in play a lot and ride high BABIPs and play some good defense and run well. Like that's what McNeil is at the end of the day. And I almost wonder if these guys are starting to get a little undervalued or if they're just overlooked as prospects. I know they got a kid out in Pittsburgh, Brian Hayes, who's a similar kind of player, really good defender, really good runner. He's a little bit bigger of a body too, but he like doesn't strike out at all, and he's got a really good approach. But people are wondering like, well, how much of what is the ceiling here if he's like the power isn't really there, which I guess you could kind of say it isn't for McNeil. Doesn't have a home run yet, only projected to hit about 10 or 12, which is fine. But the OBP is amazing, and this goes back to the fact that you can produce a lot of value for getting on base at an above average clip, and you're playing good defense and you're running well, and that's the MO of McNeil. He's not going to hit 20 home runs. It doesn't really matter. You don't need to hit 20 home runs to be a productive player. I don't know what the ceiling is, man. I think it's about 3.5 with well-rounded everything, but I could see him being one of these guys that is just kind of like a stalwart utility guy for the next 4 or 5 years, where he's producing a good amount of value and he's severely underrated year in and year out.
I mean, it reminds me of TJ Rivera, who everybody made a really big deal about. A, because he was from the Bronx, and B, because TJ Rivera batted like 340 or something with a marginally lower OBP at the major league level, and TJ Rivera could also play around the infield. But Jeff McNeil looks like a major league player.
Good,
he really does.
Really approach.
I mean, you use the term utility man, but
that's just because he can play at a bunch of spots.
Yeah, but he's like a guy that
everyday utility man. Marwin Gonzalez, essentially, right? TJ
Rivera was a guy who was a utility man because he was a nice guy to have on the bench because of his versatility. I feel like Jeff McNeil is becoming the kind of player that you can't afford to sit at all during the week.
He should be like 150 starts, but I don't think he's going to get there based on pacing. But I guess we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah. Obviously, the Mets seem to be a little more predisposed to days off this year and getting ahead,
which is understandable.
Which is like buying into the Aaron Boone philosophy. There's no such thing as being hot. Past performance doesn't influence future performance, but it's really exciting when the Mets get a guy who can actually hit because they're not known for developing like these stud hitting prospects. We've definitely said this before, but Jeff McNeil really strikes me as Daniel Murphy that can play defense. And Daniel Murphy obviously figured out the power later on in his career. And Daniel Murphy got a lot better when he left the Mets.
He did, yeah. That was, I mean, a variety of things went into that. Murphy didn't peak until he was like
30?
Like 30? Yeah, it was kind of a weird one in terms of that. But
is Jeff McNeil an all-star? You think it's going to happen?
I think he's going to get snubbed. I think he might be one of those last vote guys because he's not getting the exposure that the rest of the Mets are getting. And that's how you get in that last vote category, right? You get 3-4 guys above you who are better performance-wise, Conforto, or a position that's a little bit harder. All the starting pitchers in this, Diaz is going to get the bid. So you're going to have like 3 or 4 guys in contention for a Mets all-star bid. And then McNeil's going to be sitting there at like probably a really good everything, And the stats aren't that flashy. And this is the problem. I'd say he's not. I say he gets snubbed. But he's one of those guys that everyone looks at and goes, he probably should have been.
It's the election day this year.
Really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this year it's not going to be a long-standing ballot. They're going to have like the way they do a real election.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
Yeah, so that's exciting.
I'm excited for that.
Be fun to cover.
Yeah, it would be.
All right. When we're back, we've got a patented Lance in slow motion rant.
Walked 11 times, been intentionally walked 7 times. Out to center field. That's well hit. Nimmo's going back toward the wall. It is gone! Into the bushes! The second 3-run home run of the inning for the Phils. They're on top 8-0. He is the best number 8 hitter in the league.
Okay. You've waited, but we're finally back with another Lance in slow motion. Lance, what's bugging you today?
Yeah, no, it relates back to something that I think happened a bit ago, but we kicked this segment I think last week on the show. So it relates to pulling pitchers. This is something that has come up a ton. It comes up in the playoffs, especially because it's more of a gut instinct thing. But relates to managers pulling pitchers when they're pitching really well, deep into a game, and then immediately after their bullpen giving up the game. This happened with Blake Snell in Toronto. I think he threw about 80 pitches across like 6 innings. And he flipped the lineup over for a third time, faced Freddie Galvis to start off that inning, to finish like the 6th, I think. And then they pulled him for the next inning. They brought in Chaz Rowe, and Chaz Rowe ended up giving up the lead and eventually the game. And After the game, Kevin Cash was asked why he pulled Snell, and he said that it was a workload management thing where they wanted to be really conscious of guys like Glasnow and Snell early in the year. But in reality, I almost wonder how much it was purely the fact that pitchers deteriorate third time through the lineup. This has been the reason that the Rays go towards this bullpenning strategy, and it's worked for them because they're just not having guys face batters for the third time in a game when their averages and everything goes up a ton. So the main question I had was just whether a pitcher's performance in the first 6 innings, if he's dominating like Snell was, Snell gave up, I think, 2 base runners, which K'd like 9 over 6, whether that performance is predictive of success third time through, or whether it just goes back to the average of the pitcher, regardless of how he's pitching in that inning. My assumption would be, and I think this deviates from what a lot of people think, but my assumption would be that it actually doesn't deviate that much, that the third time through the order isn't really, it's not tied to whether you're pitching really well in the prior couple innings. It's just the fact that third time through, a guy's able to see all of your pitches. He's seen them twice. You probably, if you don't have a third pitch, like Snell is a pretty 2-pitch dominant guy. It's the same with Glasnow too. It's like you're going through the third time. It's like it doesn't really matter how you pitch the first 2 times through. You're pitching with those 2 pitches, and that's been your success. So I just wonder. This is more of a question. I had a pretty good debate on Twitter with some people. I just wondered whether this matters at all, and whether we should be hitting managers as hard for this availability heuristic of understanding that a guy isn't pitching well, therefore you should pull him, and if he's pitching well, you shouldn't pull him. But I don't know. I think it's this thing where the bullpen comes in and blows it. It's just much easier to blame the manager. If this wouldn't be a discussion if Chesro came in and shut down the side and then they won that game. So I just wonder. This goes back to something we're going to hear in the playoffs a lot. Early in the season, I get it's a workload thing, but I always just really wonder where the balance is with pulling guys late in games, especially when they're pitching well. And I guess I lean towards the side of stats and saying that you should probably pull them regardless of how he's pitching if they're facing the lineup for the third time. So,
well said. Well said.
Jumping in their seats, where do they go? To meet the Mets! All the fans are true to the orange and blue, so hurry up and come on down, 'cause we got ourselves a ball club, the Mets.
All right, to close out the show, we're going to read a comment Justin got on Facebook after posting his story about how the Mets are not putting the most optimal team on the field by not signing Dallas Keuchel. And this was a great comment. He sent it to a group chat with myself and a buddy of ours, and we were laughing. This guy probably looks like he's in his 70s. Was one of the Facebook trolls that sent Justin a very long, elaborate message with multiple typos. Probably spent 10 minutes on it unnecessarily because I don't even know if Justin interacted back, understandably. But we're gonna read it, and it's a great comment. But I guess Justin wanted me to describe the person first, so I'm gonna look at a picture right now and describe it. He's got the classic. Like someone took a razor down the middle of your head, so it's just hair on the side. It's like a weird kind of balding that you see in a lot of older men. Unfortunate, but it is apparent. Holding a guitar. He's got his hand on his chin. It looks like he's wearing some kind of like band tour t-shirt from like a metal band from years ago. And then there's another picture of him in a classic plaid short sleeve shirt. One of those like someone cut your sleeves off. Standing next to what looks like a Van Gogh painting. Man, this guy is just I don't even know what to say. It's exactly what you think it is for someone who would comment on a Facebook post with like 200 words of babble. So it's a great one.
Okay, here's what Bob D
had
to say about my column. This is perhaps one of the dumbest articles in the history of human communication. It's just a roundabout way for the author to say he doesn't agree with the moves Van Wagenen made over the winter. He is basically saying that Van Wagenen made a lot of moves, but they weren't the right ones, and right is spelled wrong. Okay, according to who? Some little doucherama who happened to scrape enough money together to be able to buy a computer and then learned how to type? The dude writes, Van Wagenen passed on top-tier arms such as Dallas Keuchel. The best available team is not on the field. Top-tier arm? Keuchel's in his 30s and on the downside of his career. Maybe he has a few good seasons left, but who knows? The best team is not on the field? How does the writer know that? Because the Mets didn't sign the most expensive player at each position? This is not a fantasy league. There are a lot more factors to consider than what is on the back of a baseball card, what fathead posters the author of this article has up on his bedroom walls. Bryce Harper and Manny Machado spent years with the Nats and Orioles, respectively. How many world championships did they win there? Come on, dude. Get a job covering the bocce circuit. Baseball ain't your thing.
Bocce circuit sounds fantastic.
The bocce circuit would be something great to cover.
Exhilarating.
Just to clarify, I don't have any fat heads on my walls, and I don't, unfortunately, own any baseball cards in my Chicago residence. But, Bob, we appreciate your feedback. We appreciate, you always keeping us on our toes. And
Hope you're listening, Bob.
Maybe you'll get hired as the GM of the Mets one day because it sounds like you really got a picture of what's going on.
Don't take my description to heart, Bob. I'm sorry.
That is the episode of Finding Nimmo today. We thank you all for listening. This one was a lot of fun. Like I said, we'll be away for a week just because of bad scheduling issues. Dumbass Lance, with travel.
Yeah. I'll be here, man. I don't know what you're talking about.
But, thank you for listening. Mets play today, and we'll be back in a week. Thanks.
All the fans are true to the orange and blue. So hurry up and come on down, 'cause we got ourselves a